The following podcast is a production of University Counseling Services through California State University Northridge. Kaysen Rempel is a doctoral psychology intern for the institution's APA-accredited internship in health services psychology. Every Gamer Has a Voice is a podcast hosted by a mental health professional that's designed to create discussions about discrimination in gaming experienced by those belonging to underrepresented identities. Through sharing personal experiences as well as disseminating research, this podcast is aimed to shine a light on this type of discrimination while also helping gamers and minority groups feel validated and educated on how they can protect their mental health. Okay, so for today's episode, I'm joined with a guest who is someone I've known for probably over a decade. Or it might be, yeah, well over a decade, probably around 13 years. But his name is Stephen Hsu. He got his master's in marriage and family therapy from Pepperdine and is currently doing his PsyD in clinical psychology at the University of Hartford and has recently matched for internship. He has an interest in neuropsychology and, just like me, is a gamer on the side. We play a lot of Overwatch together. And what other games do you play, Stephen?
I play various others such as League of Legends, Teamfight Tactics, uh, Marvel Rivals, though not as much recently. And then I just finished a game called Cult of the Lambs.
Okay, nice. So like multiplayer and single player.
Yeah, one of them being multiplayer online battle arena type games. Auto chess is the other, and then single player. I'm trying to get it more into now.
All right, nice. And where did you match for internship again?
I matched at the Lexington VA, so I'll be starting there in July.
Okay, great. Congrats on that. Excited for you.
Thank you.
So because Stephen and I are both gamers and in the field of psychology, we kind of have we're trained in consuming research. And so what I think would be really interesting for this episode is to go over um, a dissertation. And actually, what I'm going to do, let me pull this up because I want to make sure I get the title right. But Stephen and I plan to talk about it, some of the specific results, and our thoughts on it too, just integrating all that we know and our personal experiences. I was asking me to confirm that I'm a human, but okay, so this article and what I can link in the description too is from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology at National Louis University. And it's titled Derogatory, Racist, and Discriminatory Speech, or DRDS, in Video Games. And that acronym DRDS is just like used a lot. So what could we like how could we shorten it?
That's a good
Dirds?
question. Dirds, yeah. I mean,
Dirds.
that's how it looks like it'd be pronounced.
Right.
Dirds. Yeah,
Dirds itself kind of sounds like a not nice word to call someone, but
that is also true. So it's
derogatory.
fitting in that way.
Right. Derogatory, racist, and discriminatory speech. So that's what DIRDS stands for this purpose of this podcast. Um, yeah, so what I know I have a list of talking points here, Stephen, and we
Mhm.
could go in order or we could jump around, but was there anything that stuck out to you? I know you said you had a bit to say.
Yeah, I mean, when looking over just some of the, different results that came up from it, some of it was unsurprising, which is sad to say in a certain sense. Just knowing how much dirds is out there in the video gaming space.
Right.
Um, One of the things that popped up for me was actually, um, so in the results section, it showed that males reported experiencing sexual harassment at half the frequency as women and intersex individuals. The last part of it, though, is however, age showed no significant effect on frequency of experienced sexual harassment, which I thought was fascinating and surprising. Um,
Mm.
I would think that there'd be more. It would depend a lot more on the age of an individual whether or not someone be uh, hopefully giving less harassment if there was someone younger and or even older, I guess, as well. But it was just very odd to see that overall, unless I misinterpreted it.
Right. Yeah. I think with that one, my thought is like just with the general anonymity that comes with games or that comes with
Hmm.
gaming. I'm wondering if just age is something that is like either completely unknown in the moment or is like
Hmm.
completely thrown out the window because that actually that reminded me of another thing that the results section showed, which is that dirds are more likely to be said over text chat versus voice chat.
Mm,
And
yes.
I'm like that got me thinking too, like, could it be that voice chat removes a layer of anonymity to where people might not feel comfortable being overtly offensive with their own voice? Or it also, I think, using your voice, there's a level of exposure when
Hmm.
compared to typing. But yeah, what do you think about that one?
I agree with that as well. Yeah, there's the exposure because I think about when we're talking, some individuals that are playing these games, you know, they may be living with other people, and so therefore, if they were to say these, derogatory, racist, or discriminatory language at all, and let's say it's someone younger, they're living with their parents still, and their parents maybe wouldn't be happy about that. They could get definitely punished or have consequences for those actions in real life versus if they just typed it out and then put in the text speech, then again there is that lack of uh, maybe disconnection, but also that, as you were mentioning, they wouldn't be exposed at all. There's no trail necessarily to lead back to them, unless, of course, if you went through through the companies that ran the game.
Yeah, that I didn't even think about that actually, about how the physical shared spaces,
Mhm,
like their words would be heard versus yeah, just
mhm.
typing it. And yeah, that's a good point too.
Right, and unfortunately, as you and I have both, experienced in our times of gaming, sometimes people are not quiet in their in their language and what they speak. They are usually sometimes very loud and sometimes screaming, honestly.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if they were to try to do that and try to say these things in situations where they're sharing that space, then 100% maybe some people there would be possible consequences for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and that I think we can picture like a raging gamer because it's like
Yes.
something we encounter or whenever there's like a raging gamer, a lot of times it makes for content of
Hmm.
um and then that's something I kind of enjoy seeing is in a way it's like a form of retaliation of like some might even call it like adaptive humiliation of like if someone is in a Overwatch lobby and there's a guy being really overtly sexist, and then if the
Hmm.
person, like if the female creator posts that on YouTube, it tends to do pretty well, because a lot of people are able
Hmm.
to see it and really just note like the consensus is unanimous of how that guy's behavior is very inappropriate.
Yeah, there's like a validation from the original poster of being like, I have to deal with this, and then there's support from the community. Hopefully, generally, that would be like, wow, so sorry you had to go through this. This is terrible. That is inappropriate and just inexcusable behavior to be have to deal with.
Yeah, yeah. That gets
I th-
me thinking of another talking point, but I do want to hear what you have to say, so go ahead. first.
Well, I was just thinking as well of one of the other things that comes from the results is that it made me think of this as well, is that some participants that use DIRDs think of it as lighthearted or banter, and so it's something they think of as almost a joke. And so I can also see how in social media for that person trying to post that kind of behavior, certain people online also just trying to banter, make light of it, or even joke about it, either whether seriously or ironically.
Yes, and I thought that portion of the results was so telling of gaming culture because
Mhm,
and I think the trend that they was seen there in the results is that adults 18 to 25 tended to view it as like lighthearted or banter or not that deep, whereas
mhm,
adults over 25 um viewed it as being more hurtful.
mhm.
And I think that it makes me think of just that saying of like, oh, it's not that deep, which is like sort of a cop out, and there can be of when something doesn't land the way you want it to. But I think what it
Mhm.
could also reflect is that different generations, like a generation that is was raised very online, may have like different attributions that they give to dirds.
That's true. I think that's a really good point. I think because you and I knowing our birthdays are right almost on the cusp between two generations actually. And so the older generations above us are within one, and then a few years below us are just a whole different generation, technically, in terms for how they interact with medias, internet culture, gaming, even. I mean, they came into a space that's where internet was more profoundly incorporated into daily life rather than us who kind of saw it more at the as it started to burgeon up into society.
Right. And what the results showed that it kind of builds on that is that there was a positive correlation that people who experience, like people who receive DIRDs, are also more
Mhm.
likely to they themselves say DIRDs. And what the research paper described is it's likely it may reflect a form of retaliation.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I thought that was very interesting. Is that the correlation suggests that it is in a way almost a two-way street.
Mm. Yeah, it's like a learning yeah, it's almost like a learning thing of like, well, if they're going to do this, I'll either stoop to their level, or they'll in a sense also be like, well, if they're doing this, then maybe this is the best way to attach someone because they've made me feel this way, maybe I can hurt them as well.
Yeah, and the brief nature of it too, of like after Overwatch, you have 20 seconds to type and it's to type to your heart's content, and then it's like the lobby is gone. You'll never see those people again. So it's
Hmm.
like there's just you. I think people might feel the pressure that they want to make their words count, or like they really want to
Hmm.
drive home a feeling or a message with the one or two sentences they have.
Yeah, and I think also there's not only to affect the other person, but also internally for themselves relieving themselves in that kind of uh that level of just retaliation and that self-soothing nature of, okay, I got the last word in, I feel better, uh and I can go on with my day because that was a snappy retort of some sort, maybe in the last few seconds.
Snappy retort, yes. I'm looking at like this one block of text I have written here that
Mhm,
um and I may just read this because I think there's a lot of discussion to be had, but it cites a
mhm,
study from 2020, and what it says is so it's looking at emotional intelligence. And so it
mm,
says they sought to specifically examine gaming domain and how to gauge or gauge, I should say, how to gauge how levels of variables such as loneliness, depression, online gaming motives and age governed and moderated the level of emotional intelligence and presence of in game discrimination. So it looks like the findings showed that the external environment could be a major cause for problematic behaviors in gaming. They found a direct and inverse relationship between emotional intelligence and the presence of in game discrimination. Shocker. Um, Also, the data shows that those who rated themselves as low in emotional intelligence scored higher in measures of disordered gaming, poor psychological control and behavior, internalization, and externalization of problem behaviors. Um, in this study, externalization meant aggression and rule breaking. And then I'll finish with this sentence, but furthermore, data shows that gamers with higher traits of emotional intelligence tend to engage in gaming for skill development and recreation rather than coping or escape. So I think there's a lot of really cool data there. But what sticks out to you from that?
There's so many, honestly. The first thing I think, or I see here is, data showing that those who rated themselves as low in emotional intelligence scored higher in measures of disordered gaming, poor psychological control and behavior, internalization and externalization of problem behaviors. I mean, the data of that people having that self awareness of, uh, or maybe sometimes they don't have that self awareness, but that understanding of, from our perspective, that lack of maybe the executive functioning or the level of being able to regulate themselves either in the real world truly does just translate to the video game space as well, and
Yeah.
unfortunately also can take the form of aggression and rule breaking, and you got to wonder if whether or not they also engage in that in their everyday life, just because I think of, in our training, and you may have heard this as well, like how someone shows up in the room also possibly is how they show up in the rest of the world with other people in their life.
Right. Right. And this makes me think of a personal theory I have when it comes to playing Overwatch is that
Hmm.
I swear that if I briefly play a game or two during a holiday that is tied to social interaction, whether that's Thanksgiving, Christmas, probably those two are the main ones, maybe Valentine's Day, the
Hmm.
people in those lobbies are so mean. And I
Hmm.
have this working theory of they may not have people to celebrate this holiday with, which maybe is causing them to feel upset and take it out on this video game. Or the opposite direction of that is they may be unpleasant people, which leads them to not have people to celebrate this holiday with. Um, yeah.
That's a good theory. I can definitely see the merits of that for sure. I mean, I I wonder, you'd have to look at the data
Yeah.
from the video game companies. Is there higher rates of reporting players? Is there higher rates of just discriminatory or DIRDs overall
Mhm.
within like the gaming space? Just even across. I mean, we talk about Overwatch, but multiple other gaming platforms as well.
Right.
I mean, I play League, and League is unfortunately notorious for how much dirds there are in that realm.
Yeah. Dirds and just how also how much they tend to really be focused on identity. So
Mm,
whether they're like racial slurs or sexist slurs,
mhm,
or homophobic slurs. But one thing that I thought was really interesting in the discussion portion of this is it cites some things that the participants said. And one of them, the participant who was a male, said that he thought the phrase like women gamers can't coordinate for blank, a swear word, but he said that that
mm.
phrase was funny, but he acknowledged that if he were a woman he would likely think that it's cruel. So there's
Hmm.
this like internal acknowledgement of perspective taking, but it doesn't seem to really go past that. Or there's like or shouldn't say internal, but there's like an intellectual component of you can imagine yourself feeling like that's hurtful, but it doesn't seem to really go past that.
I think it ties back to what you were talking about earlier with emotional intelligence, though. Like there's an intellectual component, but there's not maybe emotional intelligence per se of taking that step beyond empathy of, oh, I can understand. So let's do something about it and let's not have someone feel this way.
Yeah. Right, right. And really with the when you add that with the level of anonymity, people can really get whatever they want out of online interactions, and sometimes that is cruelty.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think I remember reading or learning about I believe the person that created the Stanford prison experiment did more research on how if there's people that uh, cover their face, they're more likely to engage in crueler or more awful aggressive behavior. And I feel like we're seeing that also play out inside that gaming space as well, of just again with that anonymity.
Right. What a literal way to not only cover your face but have almost no part of you be recognizable or perceivable.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a sense though, like there is stuff that is can tie back to who you are and your identity. I think back to usernames which was mentioned in the article of someone will have identifying information in their usernames, or I mean, to as far as we can tell, maybe it's also done ironically, and we don't 100% know. It could be done as a joke.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in that part in the article, what you're referencing, what
Hmm.
they were saying is that parts of like a recognizable parts that might be deemed more female were associated with higher levels of experiencing DIRDs.
Hmm.
And I think,
Yeah.
in the games I play, I think what that might look like is for those listening who might not be aware of Overwatch, Mercy is a character largely associated with female gamers, and there's a lot of misogyny and sexism tied to that character and people who play that character. But if someone is someone who we know were to make their name something about playing a lot of Mercy, and making their banners, making like being very visibly a Mercy player, a lot of times that gets called out, and oh, usually in a bad way.
Hmm. Yeah, it can definitely uh, increase the dirge that occurs, as well as just also definitely impact the player who is trying to also just play and have a good time, depending on what their motive is. Again, really, going back to the article and what I was saying about how some of these occurrences, how much degree it affects someone depends on just so many different certain circumstances, such as their condition at the time of exposure, how often they're exposed to this. But if your username is often linked to it and you have banners surrounding it because that's just something that you really are engaged in and what you like, you're going to unfortunately have a lot of possible occurrences with DIRDs then due to that.
Right. I think a sentiment that I hear a lot is, and I think it's one that's meant to be encouraging, but the sentiment is that if you're experiencing these DIRDs, just keep going on, and you'll learn to cope with it. But the results
Hmm.
from this paper don't seem to support that. They seem to really show that there's a link between the more DIRDs you experience and the more often, the more distressing it is.
I can see that as well. Yeah. I mean, it you may get thicker skin to some degree, but overall, also, I can see this also being just more of a deterrent. This article really just being evidence to suggest people why many people, especially from minority groups, just shine away from video games and having to deal with this.
Right. Yeah. And that sentiment of like, oh, you develop thick skin, I see that that could be a pretty harmful sentiment because
Hmm.
it's almost absolving the people who are saying dirds of blame. And it's saying,
Mm.
hey, they're not going anywhere. When in reality, things should be done about that. And I think certain things like updating reporting systems and
Mm.
that can be a good step. That brings me to another thing of like people in the it seems like younger people in the what this study said seem to write off dirds as like, oh, they're just said by teenage boys who are immature and they don't mean much, which I think is
Mm.
excusing bad behavior. And I think society
Hmm.
tends to do that for boys a lot. And that could be a
Yeah.
whole other podcast on a whole other topic, but that caught
No.
my eye.
Yeah, I think the culture of that, or that saying that I know you've heard this, boys will be boys, right? It's an awful, almost dismissing, statement, and also absolving the boys of any uh consequences for their actions or accountability
Right.
of just, oh, it's in their nature, but that's not true at all. um and so I agree with you in the sense of like the change would definitely have to come in terms for updating reporting systems. I think a lot of this has to do with also not only the companies, the video game companies, and how they handle these interactions, but also in terms for the culture. Video game culture is unfortunately, or gaming culture is very um, notorious, I guess, in certain senses for dirds occurring, and somehow we've just developed into this kind of culture over time.
Right. Where it's almost like accepted as being part of it when in reality
Mhm.
that might just reflect us having too low standards.
Yeah, the bar for gamers definitely needs to be raised in terms for this type of spaces, um, that you know that we're a part of. I think of you know all these different games, which was interesting also in the data of faster paced games also had more dirts than slower paced games. Um, and so this gaming culture, like being in certain areas more than others, was also fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of took that to mean like it seemed like the faster games they were citing were just a lot more competitive in nature and
Mm,
almost thinking like when tensions are high, people who are saying dirds might, yeah, they may have low emotional intelligence or they might be more likely to give like a maladaptive reaction to anger and lash out at a teammate if the
mhm.
game isn't going their way. I think it also said that, and this result didn't surprise me much, but it said that people are more likely to receive dirds when they're not performing well.
That I would agree with that. I mean, the especially in team-based games like we think of Overwatch, if one individual on a team of 5 is not doing as well, their performance will impact the rest of the team and therefore the rest of the match. And if you're invested in the match and want to win, as a lot of people do competitively, um, some people think the best way of handling that is just using dirts, even though that's not going to help the situation whatsoever. Um, though it may make them feel good to say something.
Yeah, it's like that um momentary saying that momentary thing might grant a bit of relief, but
Mm.
it is ultimately it's causing harm as well or has the potential to.
Yeah, again, going back to certain circumstances of like what leads to the impact on them. I definitely think a lot of it just does depend on the conditions at the time of the individual when they're playing the game. Um, I think especially, I think at least personally for me, coming home after a long day of working with clients, whether that was either through therapy or doing assessments, you know, at times you'll just be really tired emotionally after giving yourself up to try to be the best that best therapist you can be for them, and then coming home to you know dirds while gaming just definitely has impacted me, at least I know for sure at times. No, almost never positively, though maybe one would give me a chuckle based off of how uh ingenious they may be of something I may have never heard before.
Right. Yeah. I laugh not because it's funny, but because it is absurd, and it's something I experienced too, of like the people saying these dirds. And I think it's one of those really unique things about the gaming space, is that like if you go to, I don't know, like a park, you're going to have park goers there, and they're going to be
Mhm,
community members, and they're going to, at least on some basic level, share some sort of commonality of choosing to
mhm,
be there at that moment. But with gaming, like, it really is, and with the matchmaking of Overwatch, where, or any game really of matchmaking, you can be playing with
mhm,
these people who you would never ever organically come across in real life, and yet
mhm,
here you are as their teammate. And yeah, I've noticed that too. And I think that may bring us to a closing question I have for you, Stephen. But
okay.
given like your training and also your experience as a gamer,
Mhm,
what words would you have to give gamers who may be from marginalized backgrounds, who might either be experiencing DIRDs or have a fear of experiencing DIRDs? What might they do for self care or
mhm.
encouragement?
Um, I think the first and foremost is, you know, uh, examining, I guess, your first settings, I guess, in terms where do you want to interact with these people? Is one thing of certain games, especially like Overwatch, you can mute people, you can turn off text channels, and while that may be disconnecting you from other people, it also would limit the amount of dirds you may also come across as well. Um, but I also understand how some individuals don't want to do that and or interact with that. And I think a lot of the self care that I would tell them in the end is, learn to when to step back. If it's something that, looking into yourself, checking in with yourself of how you feel. If you find yourself to be more having more negative reactions and having more negative emotions than not, asking yourself, why do you play the game then? Maybe it's time to step back a little and maybe engage in a different hobby or do something else. Um, I think it's important to know when a game or a video game, especially, knowing the difference between, is it bringing you joy and is it something fun, or is it just more of a habit to escape from? I know that's something that I've wrestled with myself at times, and I know that could be also helpful for other people.
Yeah, thank you for that. That also, getting into that topic on the article about the intent behind, like when you turn that game on. Yeah,
Mhm,
that's so important. And that um I think it sounds like you're encouraging also that emotional awareness, or even emotional intelligence, to look within and think, okay,
mhm.
is gaming what I need right now, or do I need to stand up and stretch, take a break, maybe tend to my body needs, drink something, eat something?
Yeah, I also I think it's an important piece. I also think the gaming space is so wide, and while we've been mainly talking about games with dirds, specifically usually because you're in a multiplayer games. I think also n- n- to be also aware there's other games out there that can be just as fun that's only single player. Um, that can still not necessarily be competitive, although there are some. Um, but you don't have to interact with people. You can still find that same joy of escaping, possibly if that's something what you're doing, or just trying to have do something novel and fun or challenging. I think about the Souls games, Elden Ring, very, very challenging games. It takes a lot of skill and a lot of self-discipline to keep going through the bosses. Um, but also you don't interact with people as much. It's you versus a computer.
Right. Yeah. The diversity within the games themselves. That's funny when you were mentioning single player games and you said the Souls games, and in my head I was thinking Animal Crossing, which is very different but fitting. And I think that
Yeah.
itself shows just how many options we have as gamers of um do we want to try really hard, or do we want
Mhm.
to have a cozy game? And yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's important to not like fall into a habit or compulsively play, rather than like to find it more, or to instead try and find it more fulfilling, right?
Yeah, we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves.
Exactly. And on that note, um I want to thank you again, Stephen, for coming on this podcast and discussing this article. Is, I think, a really rich conversations to be had.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.